What's up, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, and the broader markets. I'm going to break down some important updates involving Jerome Powell, what's happening with some big data coming out for tomorrow, and what you should be watching for as time goes on. Just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I'm saying as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you sign up for Moomoo, the link down below, and deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $2,000, you're guaranteed 25 in total. And deposit $5,000 and you're guaranteed 60 free stocks. The offer ends at the end of July, so check it out before they run out. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with this market. So, as far as the SPY chart is going, as you guys could tell, we have this slight bearish divergence right over here. But despite that, that's not going to be the only thing that's really dictating this potential dip that could be coming. It also depends on our GDP numbers coming out for tomorrow. But keep in mind, we called out this resistance at this 608 area. If we break that resistance, we're looking for essentially the 610s. And if we can't break that, there's going to be a risk of us returning back down to 604.5. If that level fails us, there's a gap to fill all the way back down to 600. So it's going to be a very, very pivotal support for where the market's going to be heading next. So we're going to be watching this very, very closely. This depends on some factors. With what Jerome Powell said today, the market did sell off just a little bit. It wasn't that major. We're actually up 0.06% for the day overall, but the market did see a small rejection. Even on the QQQ, we saw this thing pump all the way up to about 543, and then this ended up closing closer to like 541 for a small, teeny tiny dip, which could cause more consolidation or even a small dip if we continue to fall a bit. But then that could also be followed by a big bounce later on. So I'll give you guys more clarification about what I mean by that in just a couple of minutes. I first want to talk about what Jerome Powell said and also what's going on with our economic calendar. So Jerome Powell has warned that there is a risk of longer-term inflation if President Trump ends up settling on higher tariffs indefinitely. And he's saying this ahead of the deadline that's coming up on July 9th for the 90-day pause that President Trump announced. So for the time being, the market's bullish because it really, really enjoyed the news about the ceasefire. In fact, I'm very happy about that too. And as of right now, it looks like it's holding. We'll see if that ends up being the case as time progresses, but I really hope that we get more peace and the ceasefire continues. Now, with that happening between Israel and Iran, and hopefully with tensions kind of cooling off between the US and the other countries, we could be looking to see a bigger move in the stock market. Now, with everything that's happened, the market's now kind of like reacting negatively to this news. Jerome Powell also told us that not only is there a risk of higher inflation, but he did talk about the possibility of their GDP revisions. Their numbers are not as strong as what we saw before, but it's not necessarily putting us in a recessionary state, according to him. Now, I don't fully trust Jerome Powell. I'm not saying that he's correct about that. I'm just saying that's what he is saying. And I think that was a little bit more negative, at least for the markets. Then he talked about how the Fed's job is very pivotal. If they make a mistake, it's going to be very bad for millions of Americans. That's why the Fed is going to be very careful. So in that case, Jerome Powell said that he does not want the Fed to raise rates too fast or cut rates too quickly. They have to remain neutral until we get more certainty. He also said that this summer is going to be very pivotal for their policies because we're going to be watching a potential increase in inflation, which could be coming overall in the next like month or two. And once that happens, that could be, determining to what extent the Fed's going to cut. Because if we get a big surge in inflation, obviously the Fed has to keep rates higher for longer. But if we end up getting just a very teeny tiny bit of an increase in inflation, it's not too bad. This could incentivize the Fed to cut even more than previously expected. But this is also going to be dependent on President Trump's tariffs. Will President Trump impose higher tariffs, or will we see more trade deals come the closer we get to July 9th as we approach the deadline for the 90-day pause? We'll see about that just to be safe. Now, there's been some more news that's come out, with President Trump. He has said again he's very unhappy with Jerome Powell. He called him a low IQ individual, and he's just super, super unhappy with the things that Jerome Powell is doing. President Trump has already said that he has considered 3 or 4 people to replace him. This is what he said right over here when he was asked questions about this. He knows within 3 or 4 people who he's going to pick, so he's talking about how he wants to replace Jerome Powell. He said that Jerome Powell is terrible. He called him a low IQ individual. He called him a numbskull. He said he's very unhappy with the way he's doing things. And President Trump is saying he needs to see cuts as soon as possible. There is no inflation, and so on and so forth. Right? We talk about this almost every day. This is what President Trump keeps saying. But Jerome Powell cannot help but disagree because he is arguing that, once again, there is that risk of higher inflation, and they have to prioritize what's necessary regardless of politics and such. So that's part of why the market kind of like dipped a little bit. It wasn't too bad though. Heading into tomorrow is going to be Thursday, June 26th, 2025. At 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have the GDP growth rate quarter over quarter coming out. We're expecting this to actually go down by 0.2%, so it decreased by 0.2%. And then besides that, we have more GDP numbers. We are going to see a slight decrease in our GDP, most likely, especially in GDP sales, as the forecasts are kind of weak. So, not the best of news, at least so far. And we're going to be watching to see what ends up happening as time goes on once this data is out. So, expect some volatility. Will the market get a positive reaction or negative reaction to our GDP numbers? And if they are weaker than expected, this could also cause some downside in the stock market. So, this could be a catalyst to cause volatility, possibly to the downside, since we are expecting some weak numbers. So, be very, very careful. On top of this, the market's currently greedy. We're going to see how greedy we remain. Are we going to be greedy or become more neutral as time goes on? We'll have to see about that. On top of that, momentum is that fear. We're going to see how well this could hold up or if it starts to decrease or not. The put to call option ratio is dipping as we're seeing some puts being closed, helping with the short squeeze, but we'll see if that lasts. Last but not least, the VIX is neutral, so we're going to see how well that holds as well. Finally, one more thing I just want to say is that we have basically a lot of important earnings. General Mills, Jeffries, and Nike all announcing earnings very soon, the next couple of days. So be ready for all of those. I'm not going to go over all the details. I just want to give you guys a heads up about that. So looking at SPY, it's quite simple. Let me just make this clear. When you go to the daily time frame, we're still technically in a very, very nice uptrend, right? The trend is still bullish. We're making higher highs, higher lows, higher highs, higher lows. But typically, when you get like a candlestick like this at a high, we do typically see a small sell-off before we continue to go higher, at least in this trend. So we could push for the 610s on SPY, but there is a risk of us coming down just a bit first before that ends up happening. Now, we're going to be watching to see how well we can hold at these levels. Obviously, SPY is fighting some tough resistance. And if we get negative news from Jerome Powell and what he's saying to not the best GDP numbers, things could go south real quick. So looking at the 4-hour time frame, if SPY could break and hold 608, we're going to be favoring 610 plus if we continue to push higher. Now, if we're bearish, you want to see us basically fail at 604.5. That's this resistance becoming support. So basically, if we dip and we lose this support right here at 604.5, there's going to be a risk of us dumping hard to the lower 600s for a temporary move down. But even if we do dip lower, we could still get bought back up where these EMAs happen to be by the time we approach them, and we could still bounce right back up and continue to break out to new highs, even if we do get a temporary decline, right? Just because you get a small dip, it does not mean the market's insanely bearish. It could just be a temporary move. So that being said, what do I predict is going to happen? It depends on the GDP numbers. I can't make promises about that, but I wouldn't be surprised if SPY kind of consolidates between 604.5 to 608. Then we'll see if we break out higher or not as time goes on. That's going to be very, very key. But I think we consolidate for the most part in this range between 604.5 and 608. It is possible we get a small dip to like the 604s, but then I want to see if that holds or not to dip lower. Otherwise, we could still get bought back up from here. And I do think we just consolidate for some time. I don't think the market's super bearish or super bullish. It's kind of in the middle. For the QQQ, okay, this is making new all-time highs. The daily does look strong, but the shorter term for the daily is a little bit weaker. So the trend is strong on the longer term for the daily, but the short term could see a small amount of contraction, judging by what we're seeing right over here. So from what I'm seeing, we're going to be watching some key levels. If SPY and the QQQ both have the same trend, if this is a lower high compared to this high, we got to try to break and hold above 542.5 to try to continue this push. If we lose 540, there's going to be a risk of us returning back down to 538 or below. But if we hold support, if we come back down to like 540 and then we break 542.5, we could start pushing for 544 plus. So keep those levels in mind. My guts tells me that this is going to continue to uptrend, but there might be a small dip coming because of the fact that we've pumped so much without any kind of like dip. So we might retest 538 in my opinion. Maybe it goes a little bit lower before it tries to form a bottom, and then it's going to try to bounce again. But I do anticipate some chop and maybe a small pullback to 538 or so before it tries to bounce near our 20 EMA. So look for 540 to see if it holds. If it doesn't, we could be dipping to 538 for a temporary dip, but it's going to likely be very, very short-lived and very small before this tries to bounce again. Another confluence is that the IWM is showing some weakness. We did get a rejection today. It needs to get back above basically 215 to really continue higher. Might dip to 210.8, if not as low as 209. Then we're going to see if we rebound like that. But I could see a small dip to 209 to 210 before we see some buyers defend. For ES, we have tough resistance right here around 61.68. If that breaks, we're going to be pushing higher. But if we end up losing 61.20, we're going to be looking for a dump back down towards 6100. We're going to see if buyers defend there or not. So watch that very, very closely as time goes on. So that's going to be very key. So watch that as well. As we are range bound, we'll see if we end up projecting or not. But I think the odds do favor once again. ES kind of dips towards the lower 6100s. If we break 61.68, we could be bullish. But what might happen first is we dip to the lower 6100s, consolidate, but then we could still break out higher because the trend remains bullish. The trend is still bullish. When you zoom out of this, higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low before it broke out. And we could be making another higher low here before it continues higher. But before we make the higher low, this might pull back just a little bit, looking at the current trend and what we're seeing on the 4-hour time frame for a retest of 61.08 or the lower 6100s. On NQ, the same thing is going on. This is bullish in terms of the trend, but this could always dip just temporarily for a temporary move. So if we break and hold 22,500, we're bullish. If we lose 22,400, we could be dipping back down to 22,260. If this ends up dipping, we could be dipping to 22,260 before this consolidates, but then I wouldn't be surprised if we reaccumulate and try to push higher again. This could be a temporary move down towards our EMAs down here. Also, if you look at the daily time frame, for example, the daily is not looking, it's looking pretty strong in terms of the trend. A small pullback towards like 22,200 could be very healthy before this tries to bounce again. So keep that in mind. We're also not that far away from all-time highs. We're getting closer to them. So I do think we could still go to all-time highs, but there might be a temporary dip in consolidation before it tries to bounce. So please keep that in mind. That's what we're essentially eyeing for now. On Bitcoin, we look more bullish on the daily. If this consolidates, we'll have to see about that. There could be a consolidation move that comes around 106,500 or so as we consolidate before this starts breaking out higher for 108,000. But overall, it still looks a bit more bullish to me. It might come down and retest 106,800 to 106,500. Consolidate before it tries to bounce, so give that some time. Tesla's dipping right over here, so you want to be very, very careful. So if we break past 333, we're looking for a bigger push. But if we lose 320, we're looking for a dip to 316. My gut is telling me this might actually come down towards like the 316s as the European sales are declining. And we're getting a lot of negative news about that. But then we'll see if we get some kind of bounce or not as time goes on. Might be a temporary move down towards 316, so give that some time. Nvidia is very resilient. It's breaking the all-time highs. So as long as we're above this like 152.5 area, we are bullish. As long as we hold above that, we're favoring 155 or above. But if we end up losing 152.5, we could be looking for a temporary dip. I wouldn't be surprised if we dip down just a little bit to 152 and consolidate before it tries to go higher, but still looking very, very strong. And this could still continue to break out. May consolidate for a little bit before it tries to climb higher for 155 plus. So keep that in mind. 156 could be our next target. Look for some consolidation and a higher move. Appl's a little bit weak here. One thing I don't like is that we came up at a lower high, then we came back down. It might come down to 200, if not 198, and we'll see if we bounce off that or not. But look for a small dip towards 200 to 198, and we'll see if buyers defend or not. On Netflix, we could be dipping as well towards 1250, if not 1260 in that range before we see some buyers defend. But overall, as we got this rejection, we might be coming down here, and we'll see if buyers defend, so give that some time. For MSTR, we're looking a bit more bullish. We're making higher lows. I want to see if we end up holding 380 flat. As long as it holds, we could continue to uptrend like this. If we lose 378, we're going to be more bearish, but I do think the odds favor upside. For Celsius, we're going to be making higher lows right here. As long as we don't lose 44, we're going to be favoring a move back up to about 47.5. On Supermicro, we look more bullish. So long as we don't lose 45, we're favoring 48 plus. Palantir is looking bullish. There's a slight bearish divergence, but just keep in mind that as long as we hold above 137.5, we're going to be favoring upside for 148. So it's still bullish overall. Rivian, it's making higher lows. As long as we break 13.89, we're looking for a big push to the 14s. If we lose 13.5, we're going to be turning back down, but I still favor consolidation for now, and it could still try to go a little bit higher. So look for it to consolidate like this before it tries breaking out into like the lower 14s. SoFi is looking bullish. So long as we don't lose 15.8, we're favoring 16.4. AMD is looking a bit more bullish. We're favoring 144 to 145. As long as you don't lose 136, we're looking pretty good. ARM is looking pretty good. We could be dipping to 155. We're going to see if buyers defend or not. Might dip a little bit right here. 155 could be retested. I'm basically watching this resistance becoming support. 155 to 154, this range, which is where our EMA is going to be next. This could be tested before it tries to bounce. PayPal might be retesting 72 before it bounces. It's not looking too bad. Also, it has an inverse head and shoulders. So even if it does come down just a bit more, this could be bouncing all over again. So I do think it might be retesting 72 before it tries to rebound. Coinbase is very tricky. It had a high here, came down. Could it be making a lower high or not? It's still very resilient. I think it chops around a bit before it tries to go higher, but overall it's holding up well. As long as we don't lose 345, we do look more bullish. Amazon loves to reject near 215 and get bought back up around 210. It could be dipping back down towards this 208 to 210 area before it tries to bounce. So give it some time as we consolidate. Meta is dipping a little bit, might be retesting 702 to 693, and we'll see if we bounce off that or not. Maybe coming down a bit, and we'll see if buyers defend. Google is looking bullish. We could be looking for an attempt to push for 175. As long as we don't lose 169, we're favoring upside for 175, so keep that in mind. Microsoft is looking bullish. So long as we don't lose 490 to start dipping to 485, we're favoring 495 as our potential target. The VIX is kind of weak here, but here's the thing. The VIX could be forming basically a wedge right here. This might be like a wedge on the 4-hour time frame. And that could be leading to like a breakout to the upside if the market does start to cool off a bit. So keep that in mind. The 10 years coming down with what Jerome Powell has said, and the dollar is actually coming down a bit. It's making a new low, but there is a slight divergence as we're at support. Crude is kind of flat here, so I'm not really expecting much. So my general view of the markets is that we're technically bullish in terms of the trend, but there might be a little bit of a dip and some consolidation for now. On SPY and the QQQ, we might consolidate here before we start to see some more upside as time goes on. Now, this also depends on our GDP numbers coming out for tomorrow, so we'll see how they end up looking just to be safe. But don't be surprised if we see some consolidation, even like a small little dip, before we start to see more upside later on. The charts remain bullish, but this is just a short-term projection. I thank you for listening, guys. Please enjoy the rest of your guys' days, and I'll see you guys very soon tomorrow with another update. Until then, take care and peace out.